She doesn't blame the violent man who put a gun to her head and threatened her. She doesn't pick the violent man who, after this all happened, sent her a text and said, "Don't talk. Don't talk or else." She doesn't pick that. And I think over the course of this week, we'll all come to absolutely understand that choice that she made. I think the evidence is going to make clear that that's the rational choice. The choice a human being makes to save themselves, to protect themselves. And while she's up there in that chair testifying, you may understand it, you may appreciate it, but that doesn't mean you need to believe it. Okay? That's what this comes down to. Is that believable? The judges told you a couple of jury instructions. I just want to get you so you can start thinking about it, so you can put things into the context as you listen to it. The judges told you that it will be your duty to scrutinize the testimony there. The judges told you that you will need to consider whether or not there is a reasonable doubt. And the judges told you that a reasonable doubt is a doubt for which a reason can be given. So let me tell you about what the evidence is going to be and the reasons that you can consider. The reasons to doubt. And just to make sure that we're clear, as I go into this. The judges told you, and you'll get to see it again, that you can reconcile the evidence on any reasonable hypotheses consistent with Nya's innocence. You must do so and find him not guilty. So I want to tell you what our reasonable hypothesis is, because this is what happens. Amratnasak, Blackie, heartless, the man who Bridget Schlitt is deathly afraid of, a violent man who's threatening people with a gun, who's angry, who's tweaking out on meth, executes 3 people up at the floor. That's what happened. That's what the evidence is. At some point, like I said, Bridget Schlitt's going to be up in that chair. Before she was in this chair here in a couple of days, she'd been in that chair before and told the story under oath. Before she told that story under oath in 2023, she was in this chair talking to that man in 2021. But before she got in this chair, she was living a life out there, out into the world. And to understand why she said what she said in this chair, why she said what she said in that chair in 23, why she's going to stick to that story, I'm guessing, in 2024. You need to go back in time and understand who she was back then, what she did back then, what was her life like. So let me tell you a little bit from her, what I think is her perspective. She's a single mother who's living, as we heard, perhaps a dual life. A life that involves methamphetamine when she comes to the club. She'll tell you that she's a meth addict. She'll tell you in those 2 weeks before she gets into that chair after she's witnessed, threatening everybody. She'll tell you how she got to know him. Who's Cam Ratnasack, right? Before I talk to, let's just talk about who is Cam Ratnasack. This person is Blackie, this person who's called Heartless, right? Person that the state is going to call as a witness. He'll come here from prison. We don't know what he's going to say. We don't know that because I think everybody's going to agree. Everybody in this courtroom is going to agree. Everybody at that table is going to agree. He's a liar. He's not trustworthy. He's not credible. He's not to be believed. If he coincidentally says something that's echoed by Bridget, we'll get to that. But who is that man? Here's what Bridget says she knows. So from her perspective, when she's in that chair, what does she know when she's out on the street? She knows he's a man that just recently got out of prison. He's a man that's new to this area, that's from a different area, and he's coming here to La Crosse. She knows that he's a violent man. She'll tell you that she told the police, don't cross Blackie. He'll hurt you. She'll tell you, don't lie to Blackie. He'll hurt you. She'll tell you, he puts his hands on women. He'll hurt you. That's who Blackie is. When she shows up and she sits in this seat and talks to that man, you can't see it because it's covered up in makeup. She's got a black eye. Violence has been done to her. Blackie, she'll tell you, is an alpha male. First I thought of him as a leader. You know what? He's not a leader. That's a word that I think would inspire people to be. He's not a leader. He's a full leader. He's an alpha male that wants to dominate everyone, everything. He's come to a new place, a new community, and he's set to dominate. So, how do we get there? We know out there, how do we get to that chair? We know out into the world, he's somebody that was looking for me. He's threatened me. If you act, when Bridget comes up and testifies, and I believe that there's another prisoner that's going to testify as well, Michael Bennett, they will talk about this debt that Nemo had to Cam. Bridget's going to say that Nemo owes Blackie. Michael Vang's going to say that Nemo owes Blackie. Blackie's going to tell you, if he tells you what he said before, he's angry and he's pissed. His words. He's angry and he's pissed at Nemo Yang. Somebody who took his money. She's going to tell you that she saw him in the parking lot at the motel, at the hotel, Holiday Inn Hotel. Here's what we know happened at that hotel, right? Bridget Schlick pulls up into a car, and in the car, she's driving, and she has 3 boys. Okay? In another car, we have the alpha male, Blackie, who's driving, and his passenger is me. They pull up, Blackie gets out of the car, pulls out his gun, points it at me. What you'll hear from Bridget is she'll say, she saw that. And then she strolls into the hotel and talks to people in the hotel. You're going to see her on that video. You're going to get a chance to see her after she these observations of Blackie putting a gun to another man's head. You'll see her calmly walk into the hotel, calmly speak with her co-workers, and then walked back out. She walked back out. She'll say that Camden Blackie puts a gun to her head, points it at her and says, follow me. At this point now, Nya is in Nemo's spot. At the gunpoint of Blackie, Nemo is forced to get into Blackie's car, and the two then drive. Bridget's driving a car, Blackie's driving a car. And they're taking the 4 passengers, so there's 6 of them, to go up to this quarry. We know that at the quarry, Blackie gets out of the car and immediately pistol whips Trevor Mullen. He's got the gun. It's his gun. He's doing violence with the gun. He's doing violence with the gun to a man who crossed him and lied to him, and that's why he pistol whips. There's no they. It's Blackie. Blackie orders these 3 young men to get on their knees, empty their pockets, and to crawl to a particular place. He is the ultimate alpha evil man. Bridget's a witness to this. Nya's a witness to this. What Bridget will say is she thought there was going to be, what she'll say is a beatdown. Maybe that's why she was not scared when she saw the gun come out. Maybe that's why she looked the way she did when she walked into the hotel. Because she could not imagine a world in which this execution takes place. She thinks there's going to be only a beatdown. There's going to be no evidence that there was a plan, no evidence that anybody had talked about this other than Cam. Cam gets there, he threatens Bridget, points the gun at her head, right? Because at this point he knows Trevor lied, Trevor got pistol whipped, Bridget had lied. Get to that. Bridget had lied to him. She shows up at the police with a black eye. Bridget says, he points the gun at her and says, do what I say, or it'll be you. Then, the shooting occurs. And that's, I think, ultimately what you're going to need to decide is in this little box here, the shooting. Okay? Because I think we have uncontroverted evidence about Blackie being the alpha male, violent leader. He's got the gun, he's got the motive, he's got everything, he's in charge, he's driving people. And then we have this moment in time where 2 of the state's witnesses are going to say, everything changed during that. And then we'll come to after that moment in time. And it's back to Blackie threatening people, Blackie getting rid of evidence, Blackie creating a world in which other people are blamed. During that time that Bridget's out on the street, on the 20th and the 21st, this occurs at about 2 a.m. on July 23rd, 2021. Okay? So a couple of days before that, she's on the phone on the 20th and on the 21st with Blackie. The phone records, you'll see them, they speak, they communicate, they're talking, I think, for a couple of hours on each day. Sometimes when she's at work, sometimes when she's not. There may also be texts. I'll get to that, but you won't get the opportunity to see any of those text communications because Bridget, the choice to protect herself, deleted them. On the 20th and 21st, she's communicating with this man, she's talking to him, and she has questions. She's clearly connected to Cam Rasmussen 48 hours before the execution. She has a phone, and in her phone, she lists him as a contact. A London Bridges phone guy. So I asked about that. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's London Bridges phone guy. London Bridge is falling down isn't just a contact in her phone, it's her emergency contact. So we're going to get to ask her about this relationship and how it escalated over those 2 weeks to get to be that she's now afraid of him and sleeping with him, and he's somebody that's her emergency contact. That all happens just before we get to the 23rd. We see what, as I told you, we talked about what happens on the 23rd leading up to the quarry. And then you have this window of time where you're going to need to ask, who's the shooter? Who's the shooter? Is there reason to doubt that it's Nya? Does it make more sense that it's Black? That's the first question you're going to need to ask. Here's what happens after that moment in time. Blackie picks up the phone and he starts calling Bridget. Right? The phone records are clear. Blackie's got a phone, he's trying to call Bridget. And Bridget doesn't answer the phone. Makes sense. I would imagine you're thinking, that makes sense. If that person just saw somebody execute 3 men, is she going to pick up that phone from that person? She says she doesn't pick up the phone. She says what she receives is a text message after she doesn't pick up the phone from Blackie, in which Blackie sends her a text that says, don't talk. The only reason we know about that is her words. We don't know exactly what that text said. She deleted that text. After she receives that text from, who I submit to you as the shooter, that says, don't talk, she picks up her phone. She then calls her good friend, Nya Thao. She calls the person who's in the same boat she is, who's just witnessed this horrific act as a bystander. She calls and she speaks with him for 9 minutes. So, how does she get from there, the quarry, to this chair? Already when she's on the phone, she, like any human being, is thinking of what is she going to do. She gets to that chair, and beforehand she says she wants to protect herself. When she eventually gets to that chair, she'll tell you. She's motivated, she has a reason to protect herself. That's what she's doing, that's what any human being does. And so the first thing she does is she drives to the Holiday Inn, and parks in the parking lot where there's a camera that records her, and you won't have to watch all 4 hours where she sits in her car in the parking lot and contemplates life or death or sleeps or is overwhelmed. She sits there for that 4 hours. That's the first thing that she does to protect herself. After some moment in time, she eventually leaves from there about 8 a.m. She gets to the police station at about 12. In those 4 hours, she does other things to protect herself. She'll tell you that she had 2 8-balls of meth. She had these 8 balls of meth that she'd gotten from one of the, I believe it's Nemo, one of the young men that was at the court. She'd gotten these 2 8-balls of meth. And, I know there's a lot of names, Michael Bang, another prisoner that you're going to hear from. We have the 3 young men, they're connected to Michael Bang. Michael Bang had talked to Bridget Schlitt about get those 2 8-balls of meth. She's doing that work for another prisoner to get those 2 8-balls. When she's sitting in that car in the parking lot, and the video's watching her, before she goes to the police station, she goes and gets rid of those 2 8-balls of meth. She'll tell you she does that to protect herself, and she does it to save it for later. What she doesn't do is, she doesn't take the meth and throw it down the toilet. She doesn't take the meth and get rid of it. She doesn't take the meth to the police. She takes the meth to a friend's house and puts it there for safety. And what she'll tell you, if she tells you what she told us before back in 2023, What she'll tell you is the reason when she went there, to, I believe it's a Tim Marks, when she goes there, she tells Tim Marks what happened. She tells him what she saw. She tells him about this box that we're trying to figure out what happened in here. What you won't hear is Tim Marks here, come here and corroborate it. But she told him the same thing that she's going to tell you. He's not going to be here to corroborate her. After she gets rid of the meth, she then goes to the police station. She's there, she's in that chair, and she's in that chair for 11 hours. Right? There's times when she's sleeping in that chair, she comes back a couple of days later. But in those first 3.5 hours, we're going to get into some of the details because it's important for you to know whether there's reasons to doubt what she said there. You need to know what she said here. And when she was there, she immediately minimized her involvement. She says, I was there, they put a gun to my head, I left, I don't know what happened, I found out about it on Facebook. She says she doesn't know who the two people are. She minimizes her involvement. She doesn't tell them about deleting text. She doesn't tell them about the mess. She doesn't tell them about having sex with Blackie. And slowly, she sits there, and maybe starts contemplating things. She starts to add little bits, and the story's starting to come out. But they're having to pull it out of her. They're really having to pull it out of her. She's reluctant to talk about it. It might be the trauma. But it also is undoubtedly that she's protecting herself. And about 4 hours into it, she's asked about that. She then says, well, it was Blackie, it was Nya Thao. Asked to describe Nya Thao, she says, he's a short, bald baby. Blackie is a violent man who you shouldn't cross who hurts. She makes a safe choice to protect herself. She's deathly afraid. And as she'll tell you, she's afraid that she's going to be in trouble for being an accessory to murder. Because as we'll come to learn, she's somebody who drove to the quarry. She's somebody that's connected to Blackie in the most intimate way human beings connect with each other. She's worried not only about what Blackie might do to her, she's worried about the consequences with the police based upon her involvement. She'll tell you that her motive was to protect herself. Now, I'm going to fast forward in time to when she's in that chair, to a couple of days later, a week later, somewhere in there, the end of July, and Mr. Leinfelder, the police, they have Cam Rattensack, also known as Harkless, also known as Clark. They have him. He's been arrested. He comes and he sits in this chair, right? He sits in this chair and he talks to the police. And again, to evaluate what he says now and evaluate what he said in 2023, you need to know not only who the man is, but what he said back in 2021. Because the judge will tell you, do you have reasons to doubt? And it's your job to scrutinize his testimony. Here's what he'll tell you his motivations were. He says it right on a recording. He says to the police, what's going to keep me out of prison? They say, tell me the story, and his version is, what's going to keep me out of prison? Almost immediately he asks for immunity. That is, he wants some sort of protection. He wants a deal. He wants something in exchange. This is transactional for him. This is an alpha male who out on the street uses force, but now in this seat, he thinks he can use his head and outsmart the state, outsmart the investigator. They tell him when he's wanting to seek immunity, how do we know that you're worthy? That's the word they use, worthy. Worthiness. They tell him, you need to prove to us you're not a cold-blooded killer. And when he's there in response to that, and he's sitting in that chair talking to Mr. Leinfelder, he's got to decide what he's going to say. What we know he says is this: I'm afraid to tell you. He says, I'm afraid to go back to prison. Mr. Leinfelder tells him, well, just tell us your story. To which Blackie says, but it doesn't help me. Mr. Leinfelder isn't getting much progress in getting Blackie to talk about his involvement in that shooting, in that execution. But he knows that he has a bit of information, and that information is Bridget. So he talks about Bridget, and he says, you spoke with Bridget. Now remember, there were 6 people, right? There was 4 in this car, 2 in this car to start with, okay? Bridget and the 3 boys, Cam and Zach Blackie and Nya Thao. 2 of them switch, right? So all of a sudden they come into there, but at the end of the day, there's still 6 people that go there. 3 of them are executed by a cold-blooded killer. We know that. 3 wounded warriors. One of them is the cold-blooded killer, and 2 of them are either party to the crime or they're bystanders. Cam knows this. Cam's sitting in that chair, and Cam's statement to the police is, I'm afraid of the truth. They tell him, well, we talked to Bridget. And one of the things you might ask yourself is, when he hears that they talked to Bridget, does he say, thank God, you spoke with Bridget, you'll know the truth? Does he say, well, Bridget will tell you, I didn't shoot? Does he show any signs of relief whatsoever to say, this is where I'm going to avoid prison? No, he does not. He says he's afraid, essentially, of what Bridget's going to say. He says, it's a lose-lose situation for me. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Damned if he does tell the truth. Damned if he doesn't, because you'll have Bridget's version. Now remember, when he's in this chair talking to Leinfelder, he doesn't know what Bridget says. He knows what the truth is. He knows his role in that truth. He doesn't know what Bridget says. He doesn't know at that time that he has the good fortune of an evil man who had created an environment in which women recant against him. You're going to hear from him that this is somebody that has done violence to women in the past. You're going to hear from him that, and from Bridget, knowledge about women recant. He does bad things to women. Women won't talk to the police. Women change their story to the police. Whether it's Stacy in Wausau, whether it's Sarah Horton south of here, or whether it's Virginia Creel in Door County. He's created an environment in which he can manipulate people, especially women. But even he in that chair doesn't think of his good fortune. He's worried about what Bridget says. So, at the end, he tells a story that is essentially what I had told you. He had the gun, He had the motive, he had the reason, he did the violence, he threatened people with a gun, and then his version is, as soon as they got up to the quarry, he does all of these bad things. He points the gun at people, he puts them on their knees, he walks them to the space where they get executed. He has the gun in his hand, and the story that he's going to try to sell to you, the story that he used to dupe the police, the story that he's going to tell you is, I just put the gun on the hood of my car, and I was worried my Bluetooth on my phone wasn't connected to my car, so I just got back into my car, and I just sat there, was trying to connect my phone to my car. And then, I don't know what happened. Nya got into the car, and then we drove off. That's what the story he told to the police. That's the story he said in the 23rd, or in 2023. That's the story he's going to try to sell to you. That when this event here that is unknown happened, he put the gun down, walked away. This alpha, evil, violent man. Of course, again, it's our reasonable hypothesis that Blackie, who was high on meth, tweaking, he shoots them because they lied to him, because they crossed him, because they stole from him, because he wanted to dominate. Now, I'm going to come back to you probably next week where I can talk more about the law. You might hear both sides, tell you the reasons why we think you should vote in a particular way. The things to think about between now and then are what the judge is going to tell you with the law, right? We talked about this in jury instruction. You need to apply the law. And so the judge has told you about party to the crime. The theories under which Nya Thao or anybody could be guilty of that. That they directly committed it. Who's the shooter? What happened in this box that we're talking about? Who did that? Alternate theory is that a person aids and abets the shooter. They help the shooter. The alternate theory number 3, that person was acting in a conspiracy. Now the state is going to call the 2 witnesses, right? There's 6 people at the scene, one's a cold-blooded killer, and 2 people are witnesses. They're going to call people that they say witnessed this, and they're going to call Nya Thao, a quiet homeless man, the cold-blooded killer. They're going to say Bridget Schlick and Cam Rattensack say it's him. It has to be him. That's their story about who's the shooter. Now, in a week, they might come up here and say, well, we don't know who the shooter is. You might have reasons to doubt Bridget Schlick. You might have reasons to doubt Cam Rattensack. Because I'll submit to you, there will be ample reasons to doubt their shooter. And then you might see them switch gears. Say, okay, well, even if he's not the shooter, he helped in some other way. And so as we're going through the trial, I want you to listen for certain things if you could. You can listen for anything, right? You're going to find out what you want to hear. But is there going to be any evidence of a plan? All right? Will there be any evidence of a plan? Because what Bridget Schlick will tell you from that day all the way up until when she comes here that day, she thought there was going to be a beat down. That's what she thought. And that is why Mr. Leinfelder said, well, that makes you a bystander. That's what the police told her. If you didn't know that there was a plan, if you were just there because you're witnessing, you're a bystander. And as the judge will tell you, a bystander is not guilty. There's going to be zero evidence that there's a plan from anybody that's going to talk about this, other than a plan to Ham wanted to beat these guys up. That's what they thought. Neither Schlick nor Mr. Vang or Blackie, none of them are going to say, that there was a plan to execute. Now, the reason that's important is what we talked about beforehand. What happened if Bridget Schlick is a bystander because even though she helped him by driving people there, if she lacked knowledge of the execution that he did, that Cam Ratnasak did, she's not a party to that crime. She knows that, and when she sits in that chair, she'll tell you she knows that. She'll tell you she's worried still about being an accessory to murder, and that's what motivates her testimony. So what you'll need to hear is what makes Mr. Thao, whether his gender or his race, what makes Mr. Thao different from Bridget Schlick as a witness to this evil act that this evil man did when he was high on meth and in his way. One other thing that you're going to learn about from Mr. Schlick that others haven't got to hear in the past is that, or excuse me, from Mr. Ratnasak, Blackie. When Blackie was in jail, after he gets done talking to the police, they put him in the La Crosse County jail. And when he's in the La Crosse County jail, he's with somebody called, it's Michael Luca. L-E-W-K-K-O. Might be mispronouncing it. Luca. You're going to hear from that prisoner, right? A person who was a prisoner. He's going to come here and say, I was in a jail cell with Cam Ratnasak after this homicide. You're going to hear that he goes to mental health professionals and say, I'm with the guy who did the shooting. And then those health professionals tell that to Mr. Leinfelder. Mr. Leinfelder goes to ask him about it. You'll hear about what Mr. Leinfelder says, which might give you reasons to think Mr. Leinfelder was skeptical of what Mr. Lucas said. Because what Mr. Lucas says is, I'm in a cell with Cam Ratnasak, but I'm talking to Nya Thao across the hall, across another space. And when he's talking to Nya Thao across that, he says he hears Nya Thao say, I did it. They're going to bring forward a witness who's going to say he was in with Cam Ratnasak. It's not Cam Ratnasak who told him it. It's not Blackie who gave them information about what happened. That's not how Mr. Lucas got the knowledge. It's not from watching television. It's not from reading the criminal complaint. They're going to pitch to you, they're going to sell to you that this man in a jail cell is going to tell you, Nya yelled across the hall, yelled across something else to this other person and said, I did. And the only person you're going to hear from the jail about that is Cam Ratnasak's bunkmate, roommate, cellmate. I don't know if they're actually in the same cell, but they're in a pod together. That's what they're going to bring to you. Because Blackie, the alpha male, he dominates. He wants to continue to dominate. The one good thing that you will learn at the end of this is Blackie was sitting in there. Since the last time Blackie got into that chair and testified, after he tried to dupe and manipulate others, since that time, he's come into this courtroom to that judge, and he said he's guilty. He said in this courtroom to that judge, he's guilty. I don't know what he's going to say now to you. I don't know. But I know he's in prison for a long time. And even though we might not need to be afraid of that evil man, Bridget still is. Bridget still needs to protect herself. Because when Bridget made those statements in that chair to Mr. Leinfelder, and Bridget made statements under oath to others in this courtroom, she committed to a story. And if she changes that story now, Bridget knows she's in trouble. Over the next week, you're going to hear all kinds of evidence about this evil man who does violent things. And you're going to have reasons to doubt the story that the two people who were sitting in that chair, who were connected, who had reasons to lie, that they tried to sell to protect themselves. And in the end, the reasons to doubt are going to require you to vote not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. What I think we'll do is, this is a good time to take a break in the morning. As I've said to you, and I'll probably say this over and over again, just so you know, please don't talk about the case. If you need anything, let Jim or Terry know. They'll help you out with that. We'll take about, let's just start at, we'll just start at 10, let's just make it 10:30. It's probably going to be 10:30, but we'll aim for 10:25. How about that? So we'll see you in a bit. Thank you. Make sure they're working. All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hey, can you do me a favor when we do take a break? Just leave them on the bar in front of you, because we actually have to make sure they don't go back with you. But, all right, thank you.
I'll try.
Terry will catch it. Jim will catch it. All right. I think we're ready to call our first witness. Go ahead.
State calls Mark Patterson.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Have a seat over here. Good morning.
Morning.
Can I have you begin by stating your full name for the record, spelling your last name?
Mark Patterson. Last name is Patterson.
And where do you work?
La Crosse County Sheriff's Office.
What do you do there?
I'm the day shift patrol sergeant.
What do the job duties of a patrol sergeant include?
Supervising the on-shift deputies, various other tasks. I got scheduling, patrolling.
So you also patrol in addition to your supervisor duties?
Correct.
And were you on patrol the morning of July 23rd, 2021?
Yes.
On that date, were you dispatched to N629 County Road M?
Yes.
And is that address in the town of Hamilton and the county of La Crosse?
Yes.
Sergeant, do you know approximately what time you were dispatched to that location?
I believe it was like 4:57, a little before 5.
And what was the reason for that dispatch?
Caller stated that there was dead bodies at the quarry.
And you said dead bodies at the quarry. What do you mean by the quarry?
It's the Romskog quarry. It's on the top of the hill on M.
Through your work as a patrol sergeant, were you previously familiar with this part of the county?
Yes.
How long have you worked for the La Crosse County Sheriff's Office?
20 years.
And had you driven past that location previous to July 23rd of 2021?
Yes.
More than, how many times would you approximate you've driven past that location?
It's got to be in the hundreds, I'm guessing, over 20 years.
Sergeant, I'm going to hand you a stack of documents and we'll go through them one by one, okay?
Okay.
Just if it's easier, when we get to that point, I have no objection to the admission publications of Exhibits 2, 3, and 4.
Sergeant, if I can have you look at the first document that's been marked as Exhibit 2, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a map section of La Crosse County.
And does it pinpoint the address that you were dispatched to that morning?
Yes.
Relying upon your knowledge and your previous familiarity with this part of the county, is it a accurate and reasonable depiction of that part of the county?
Yes.
And Your Honor, given the stipulation by counsel, I'm going to ask for the publication of Exhibit 2.
Go ahead. And 2, 3, and 4 you can publish. You don't have to ask each time.
So Sergeant, the fair representation that the quarry is located on County M, somewhat north of the village of West Salem.
Yes.
And how would you describe the immediate area surrounding the quarry?
Pretty rural. There's not a lot of houses around the quarry.
Have you ever patrolled that location at night?
Yes.
Have you made any observations about the amount of traffic on the road during the night hours?
It's very light.
What about lights on the road? Are there street lights out there? Anything that you recall observing?
Oh, it's pretty dark.
When you arrived the morning of July 23rd, can you tell me what you saw?
When I arrived on scene, there was 2 vehicles parked at the entrance to the quarry, more towards the road, and then as you look towards the entrance to the quarry, the gates were closed, and there was 3 bodies laying at the entrance to the gate.
Did you speak to anybody when you got there?
Yes, the 2 workers that had shown up, Jerry and Alan.
And did you take any photos?
Yes.
If I can have exhibit number 3 published, please. Sergeant, is this the photo that you took that morning?
Yes.
And how shortly after arriving on scene did you take this photo?
That was probably within 10 minutes.
Can you explain to us what we're seeing here in this photo?
So I'm standing on County Highway M, almost directly across from S, looking towards the quarry to the east.
And what are we seeing in the distance there in this photo?
You have the 2 vehicles from the employees and then the deceased laying up by the gate.
What is the source of light that's shining on the gravel there?
That'd be from the headlights of my squad car.
Were you the first law enforcement officer to arrive that morning?
Yes.
And did other officers respond shortly after?
Yes.
Sergeant, when you're dealing with a scene like this, what steps do you initially take after arriving?
I had everybody back away from the scene to the entrance to the quarry, and then I blocked off County Road M from the north and the south, and also the traffic on Highway S.
When you are dealing with a scene such as this, is it important to know who's having access in and out?
Yes.
And how do you typically keep track of that?
Crime scene entry log.
We're going to publish Exhibit 4. And Sergeant, was this document prepared on scene that day?
Yes, it was.
Did you sign yourself and other responding deputies in?
Yes.
And Sergeant Patterson, do you recall approximately how long you were on the scene that day?
I believe I left at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
And what was your main role on the scene that day?
I would to secure the scene until our investigators got there, then showed them the original photos that we had taken.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any cross?
Mr. Patterson, you've been a law enforcement officer, you said 20 years, more than 20 years?
I've been here 20 years, but yes, more than 20 years of law enforcement, yes.
How long have you been a law enforcement officer?
27.
And when you arrived at the scene, you were probably wearing something very similar to what you're wearing today?
Correct.
That's your uniform that you work in, correct?
Yes.
That includes probably a firearm, right?
Yes.
Other things to keep you safe?
Yes.
As a law enforcement officer of 27 years, I imagine you've seen your share of traumatic events.
Yes.
I imagine that, for lack of a better term, at some point you, I don't want to say become hardened, but you figure out a way to deal with that. Would that be fair?
It's fair, yes.
But still, I would imagine 27-year veteran, you look like somebody who could handle yourself. Fair to say?
Yes.
Still, 27-year veteran, man who can handle himself, a man there armed. What you saw there that day probably had a lasting impact on you, correct?
Correct.
Probably had an emotional impact on you in that moment when you were there and you had to see that. You agree?
That's fair to say, yes.
Yeah. And that's again, you there after the fact. You had some sense of safety, but you were probably, well, let me back up, that's a poor question. You had lots of emotions, I would imagine, when you first arrived on the scene and you saw that?
I guess what kind of emotions are you?
I don't know, I'm guessing you had lots of emotions, and we'll get into listing some of those. But would you agree that there was a lot of emotions that you had at that time?
I don't know, a lot of emotion. I guess I'd think of
Maybe-
things I had to do.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to, sometimes we feel emotions and we don't show them. Would you agree?
True.
Sometimes we feel emotions and we're still capable of going about our tasks and our duties and doing our jobs, correct?
Correct.
That doesn't necessarily, you as a human being wouldn't have felt those emotions, agreed?
Agreed.
So that's all I'm trying to imply, not that you
Okay.
did something different, but just when you go there and you see that, you're feeling lots of stuff, because this is not something you've seen in your 27 years before. Agreed?
Correct.
Right. And so it's those kind of feelings that I just want to talk a little bit about. Okay? Can you
Okay.
tell us what some of those feelings were?
I guess I was kind of shocked that there was actually 3 deceased bodies at the quarry.
Okay.
I mean, I was kind of taken back, yes.
Right. Again, you can have lots of emotions at the same time, right? Yes?
Correct.
I would imagine somewhere mixed in there was probably some sense of sadness as well.
Suppose there was. I guess I don't.
Probably some sense of maybe not fear, but concern for your safety at least, correct?
Correct.
And this is you, somebody who'd been there much later, that's how it's impacting you, 27-year veteran, right?
Correct.
Imagine, you probably can't imagine what it would have been like to witness that happen, right?
Correct. I could.
That's all.
Any redirect?
No, Judge.
All right, thank you. May step down. We call your next witness.
State will call Dr. Ross Reichard.
All right, swear you in right over here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Judge, if I may, I understand that there's going to be also exhibits involved with this witness. Again, I have no objection to the admission of and publication of the autopsy reports, or the exhibits, which in this case happen to be the autopsy reports.
That 5 through 12, looks like.
Yes, Judge. Since we're gonna zip through them a little bit, I'm just gonna take a moment, Your Honor, to make it so we can do that a little faster for everybody.
I should actually clarify that. Were you okay with the CV and there's some type of PowerPoint?
Yes, I don't,
And Your Honor, for the record, the PowerPoint is a compilation of the exhibits we are going to publish. We just have it so that the record's complete.
that's fine.
Thank you for your patience. Can I please have you state your name for the record?
Dr. Ross Reichard, Reichard.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a pathologist.
What does that mean? What is a pathologist?
Pathologist is a subspecialty in medicine that basically studies diseases, and we make diagnoses of different types of diseases.
And where do you work?
I work at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
And what are your duties there?
I have a number of duties. I'm a forensic pathologist and a neuropathologist, and those are subspecialties within pathology. And I also have a number of different leadership roles in the institution.
Do you perform autopsies as part of that role?
Yes.
Doctor, can I have you briefly describe your education for the jury?
So after graduating from medical school from the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky, I went to the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, and I did 4 years of pathology training there in anatomic pathology, which is like a general pathology that does things like biopsies of cancers, autopsies, and then 2 years of neuropathology, which is specializing in disorders of the nervous system. Then I went to Stanford University in California and then did an additional year of pathology training there. And then I went to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and did a forensic pathology fellowship.
It's a lot of school.
Yeah.
Doctor, I'm going to hand you a stack of documents and we'll go through them one by one, okay?
Okay.
The top one there which is marked as exhibit number 5. What is that document?
My curriculum vitae and bibliography.
And can you explain to us what a curriculum vitae is, what it contains?
It's basically a summary of what we sort of went through here, my educational background, my publications, and other sort of things that I've done in my career.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of your education, your training, and your publication history?
Yes.
Doctor, are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
In what disciplines?
Anatomic pathology, neuropathology, and forensic pathology.
And you mentioned before that part of your current job duties are to perform autopsies.
Yes.
Can you describe the process of an autopsy?
Yes. For autopsies, it's a pretty standardized approach that we take. So we begin with what's known as the external examination, where we just look at the body. We determine how tall they are, how much they weigh, some basic things like that. Then we evaluate them and to see if they have any evidence of injury or natural disease and document that. From there, we then do what's known as the internal examination, where we make a large surgical type incision and look at all the organs in place, and again evaluate for evidence of injury or natural disease. We then remove each one of the organs, further examining and dissecting them, again looking to see if there's any pathology there. We then take small pieces of the tissue that we then can look at under the microscope to evaluate further, and then we also collect other specimens if we want to do other studies like toxicology or microbiology or sometimes genetic testing.
Is it part of the duty when performing an autopsy to determine a cause of death?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
So the cause of death is the underlying reason why someone died. So for example, if they have metastatic breast cancer or lung cancer, that would be their cause of death.
And how do you come to that conclusion?
Well, we integrate lots of pieces of information. Obviously, the autopsy is important. From those findings, we also will use clinical information, and sometimes we also use investigative information.
Along with determining a cause of death, you also come to a conclusion about a classification of the death.
Yes, the manner of death.
Are there specific categories related to that?
Yeah, so the manner of death is basically there's 5 categories, and it's based on the circumstances related to the death. And so those categories are natural accidents, suicide, and homicide, or undetermined.
And how do you come to the conclusion about the nature of the death?
For the manner of death, again, we'll use the autopsy findings and investigative findings, and whatever available information that we might have to best classify it.
When you are conducting an autopsy, are photos taken?
Yes.
Are the findings diagrammed?
Yes, we do that.
And do you prepare final reports based on your findings?
Yes.
Dr. Reichard, can you estimate how many autopsies you've performed in your career?
It's in the thousands. Excuse me.
Going back to July of 2021, did you perform autopsies on 3 individuals identified as Nemo Yang, Peng Lor, and Trevor Maloney?
Yes.
And Doctor, I'm going to direct your attention to what was marked as exhibit number 7. Is this the autopsy report for Nemo Yang?
Yes, it is.
Is the case number associated to it AR 21585?
Yes.
And after completing Nemo's autopsy, did you have an opinion about the cause of his death?
Yes.
And what was it?
Multiple gunshot wounds.
Did you come to a conclusion about the manner of his death?
Yes.
And what was that?
Homicide.
Was a diagram completed to show the nature of the injuries observed on Mr. Yang?
Yes, we use diagrams to help aid in our completion of a report.
If you can turn to exhibit number 8, Doctor, is this the diagram that was completed as you were doing the autopsy on Nemo Yang?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I'm going to ask that we bring up exhibit 6. And Doctor, how many bullet wounds did you observe on Nemo Yang's body?
Let's see, he had, I think 5 defects.
And in your report, you reference both penetrating and perforating gunshot wounds, correct?
Yes.
What's the difference, Doctor?
So a penetrating wound just means that the wound goes in to the tissue or the body and stays there. A perforating is a perforation, so it goes through the tissue or the body.
Hand you a laser pointer in case you want to use it at some point in your testimony. Red button right there, Doctor.
Okay.
And if we can move to page 4 of the diagram. Doctor, did you observe 2 gunshot wounds to Nemo's head?
There are 2 defects on his head, yes.
And you're using the term defect. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, just to sort of be more general, because there's an entrance and a partial exit of a gunshot wound.
And Doctor, is one of these defects labeled as wound A?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that defect?
So here on the left side of the back of the head is an entrance gunshot wound.
And was that a perforating or penetrating gunshot wound?
It was both perforating and penetrating because part of the projectile exited along this defect and part of it stayed within the head.
Was there another defect to the posterior head?
Well, there was another wound track that was associated with this defect.
And was there also a penetrating gunshot wound to Mr. Yang's torso?
Yes.
I'm going to move back to page 2 of the diagram. And doctor, can you indicate for us on this diagram where the defect is that's labeled as wound B?
Yes, here in the left posterior side, or the back of the back.
And can you describe that injury a little bit for us?
Yes, so this injury went through, the skin there went through the underlying ribs, and then it tore or lacerated the lung, and then embedded in the spine and the sort of chest region, the thoracic region.
And it was a penetrating injury, correct?
Yes,
So a projectile was located within that injury?
correct.
I'm learning. Your Honor, sorry, doctor, not enough caffeine this morning. Was there also a defect to Mr. Yang's hand?
Yes.
We'll move to page 3 of the diagram, please. And is that wound labeled as wound C, or defect labeled as wound C on page 3 of this diagram, doctor?
Yes.
Can you describe that injury for me?
Yes, so on the back of the hand is a defect, which is the entrance gunshot wound, and then on the palm of the hand is another defect, which is the exit wound. So the projectile went through the hand.
Besides these defects caused by gunshot, did you note an injury to Mr. Yang's mid-chest?
Yes, I mean, he did have some blunt force injuries, yes.
And if we can move to page 1 of the diagram, please. Can you describe those injuries specifically to the chest or torso area, doctor?
Yeah, so he had a laceration or a tear of the central portion of the chest, and he also had some abrasions or scrapes on the side of the chest or torso, and some associated contusions with the laceration, I should have mentioned. Yes. Which one? He had some associated contusion or bruise associated with the laceration.
And doctor, were you able to pinpoint that, or if any one injury caused Mr. Nemo's death?
The gunshot wounds.
Kind of a totality conclusion?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to move on now, doctor, to the autopsy report of Peng Lor. That should be in front of you as exhibit number 9. Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
And is the associated case number AR 21586?
Yes.
After you completed Peng's autopsy, did you have a conclusion related to the cause of his death?
Yes.
And what was that?
He died of multiple gunshot wounds.
And what was the manner of death?
Homicide.
Did you also, or did your team also create diagrams related to Mr. Peng's injuries?
Yes.
I'm going to have you move to Exhibit 10, Doctor. Doctor, do you recall if you had any opinions or observations related to how close a firearm may have been to Peng's body when the shooting occurred?
Yes.
And how did you come to an opinion about that?
Because of the features of the wound. So one of the wounds in particular, had what's this gray discoloration around the edge of the wound that's typical of when a firearm is discharged in very close contact to the skin.
And is there a name for that gray coloration, or?
It's soot deposition.
And that's something you've seen in your practice as a pathologist?
Yes.
We're going to start from the top of Mr. Lohr's body. If I can have us move to page 4 of Exhibit 10. Doctor, can you describe to us what's labeled as wound E on this diagram?
Yes, that's a entrance gunshot wound here on the back of the head.
And was this a penetrating or a perforating wound?
It was a penetrating wound.
Can you also identify for us what's been labeled as wound B?
Yes, that's on the anterior or the front surface of the neck.
And was that were any projectiles located related to that wound?
And so that's the corresponding to a wound that's here on the left side of the neck here. And so this is the entrance for the wound on the neck that I mentioned that has the evidence that it's a close contact range, and then the exit here is B on the front of the neck.
Okay, so the entrance wound is labeled as wound A and exit is wound B. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. We can go to page 2 of the diagram, please. Doctor, can you describe for me what is labeled as wound D and wound C on this portion of the diagram?
Yes, so wound D on the right side of the back here is an entrance gunshot wound, and wound C, the chest area is the exit that corresponds with that gunshot wound.
And were there any projectiles located related to those wounds?
No.
We can go to page 3 of the diagram, please. Can you please give me some information, doctor, about what has been labeled as wound F?
So this is a lacerated defect of the hand that's a gunshot wound. Because of the nature of the disruption of the tissue, I couldn't determine whether or not what aspects of it was like an entrance or an exit. It's just sort of been injured significantly.
Doctor, we'll move now to what's been marked as Exhibit 11 in front of you. Is this the autopsy report for Trevor Maloney?
Yes.
And is it associated with case number AR 21587?
Yes.
If I can have you then turn to exhibit number 12. Is this the diagram that was completed to identify the wounds observed during Trevor Maloney's autopsy?
Yes.
And based on Mr. Maloney's autopsy, do you have an opinion as to his cause of death?
Multiple gunshot wounds.
And what about his manner of death?
Homicide.
Did you locate any of that soot residue when you were making observations about the defects on Mr. Maloney?
Yes.
And you know what part of the body that was located on?
On the left temple or the left side of his head, there was soot deposition around that entrance wound.
If we can go to page 3 of that diagram. Is this the wound you were just, or the entrance wound you were just referencing as labeled as wound A, doctor?
Yes.
Can you provide us a little bit of detail about that wound?
Yes, so this is an entrance wound here, and then the projectile went back through the brain, sort of towards the back of the head, and that's where the projectile was recovered, so within the skull.
What about wound D on this same page of the diagram, doctor?
Yes, so this is a entrance gunshot wound at the back of the neck, and it too had soot deposition on it.
We can turn to page 2. Doctor, can you please describe for us the injuries that we're seeing on this diagram?
So the wound here labeled B is another entrance gunshot wound, and then C here on the inside of the arm is the exit gunshot wound.
Doctor, are the opinions that you've given us today about the causes and manner of death for Nemo Yang, Peng Lor, and Trevor Maloney given with a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Crosse?
Yes, please. You were able to opine the cause of some of the wounds, and some of the wounds you were not able to determine. Fair to say?
Yes.
For instance, there was some wounds that you've described as gunshot wounds, correct?
Yes.
That's because you were in a position to opine that the cause of that defect, the cause of that wound, was a bullet from a gun. That's why you call it a gunshot wound, correct?
Yes.
There were other wounds that on all three of the decedents you marked, but you weren't necessarily able to determine a cause. Fair to say?
Yes.
For instance, abrasions, right?
Correct.
So like you mentioned your examination of Nemo Yang, you noted certain abrasions on his body, correct?
Yes.
There were some abrasions, I believe, to the, what I call the left chest side, would that be fair to say?
Yes.
There were some abrasions to his left elbow, is that right?
Yes.
And some abrasions to his right knee.
Yes.
Right. Again, you don't know the cause of those abrasions, right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's why you didn't offer an opinion, because there's lots of different ways in which somebody could, their body could receive those abrasions, right?
Yes.
And again, same thing with Trevor Maloney. You did an autopsy of Trevor, you noted abrasions, you're not able to determine the cause of those abrasions, agreed?
Yes.
And again, same thing on Nya, you noted abrasions, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, I think one of the abrasions you noted on him was abrasions to the right side of his, perhaps, face, lower cheek, is that right? Is that right?
Yes.
Again, same thing, you don't know the cause of those abrasions, right?
Yes.
You would agree that a potential cause to all of those abrasions might be somebody falling and their body having contact with a hard surface covered by gravel. Agreed?
I mean, that's a possible explanation.
It's a reasonable hypothesis.
Yes.
I want to ask you some other, just very briefly, on each of the, as part of the autopsy, you do a review of toxicology, is that right?
Yes.
And sometimes that might be, you just do it, correct? That's just standard operating practice, fair to say?
Yeah, for our medical examiner cases, we routinely do it.
And sometimes the information that you gather from those toxicology reports, that is relevant to the cause or manner of death, correct?
Yes.
Sometimes it's not, correct?
Yes.
Here, would it be fair to say that for each of the three decedents, you note in your autopsy report that the toxicology comes back positive?
Your Honor, objection to relevancy.
Overruled, go ahead.
Comes back positive for methamphetamines?
Yes.
I want to ask you also just some questions here about your expertise, okay? And I imagine, and again, I'm not here to question whether you are or aren't an expert, sir. You're clearly an expert, okay? I just want to lay that out where I'm coming from. But you, probably like all of us, even if you're an expert, there's limits. You would agree?
Yes.
And so, for instance, here, your job, I think is to make two determinations, right? Essentially.
The cause and manner of death is what you're referring to? Yes.
Yes. That's basically what your job is this is what I'm seeking to do. Can I determine the cause? Can I determine the manner, right?
Yes.
And in those cases, you've said in all cases, when you have that job, you conduct an autopsy, which means you're examining the decedent's body, right?
I mean, not in all cases, but yeah, in many.
Overwhelming majority of them.
Actually, I sign a lot of death certificates without doing autopsies, so I don't necessarily.
And that's fair. I'm not trying to be, in this case, you did.
Correct.
All right. Some cases, you examine clinical information, right?
Yes.
You didn't in this case, did you?
What do you mean by clinical information?
I don't know, that was a term you used, sir. What do you mean by clinical information?
Like the medical history of an individual.
Okay. Did you go through the medical history of these individuals?
We routinely do look to see if they have medical history. I don't recall specifically in this particular case, but that would be part of our review if we had some.
Okay. And I'm guessing that doesn't stand out to you because regardless essentially of somebody's medical history, if they're shot in the head, you don't really need to figure out what their medical history to determine whether or not the shot to the head is the cause and manner of the death. Would that be a very general, fair statement?
Yes,
And in some cases, you review investigative information, you said, is that right?
yes,
Again, in this case, that's not something you recall doing. Agreed?
investigative information?
Correct.
No, I remember seeing the scene photographs and investigative information.
Okay. But we can agree that you didn't interview witnesses, right?
No,
You agree?
yes, I did not interview witnesses.
You agree you didn't review or read any witness statements, right?
No, I don't recall doing that.
You agree you did not read or listen to any recorded verbal statements from any witnesses. Agreed?
Yes,
You agree that you did not listen to any witnesses' trial testimony or any testimony that a witness has given under oath. Agreed?
yes,
And part of that is because that's not what you needed here to determine the cause and manner of death, correct?
yes,
Because it's not your job to scrutinize anybody's testimony, right?
correct.
So your opinion is limited to the cause and manner of death, right?
Yes,
You're certainly not here to provide the juror or any of us, and again, in fairness to you, that's not what you're asked, but you're not here to provide any relevant evidence as to who did it, right?
yes,
You agree with that?
yeah.
Nothing else.
Any redirect?
One question, Your Honor.
All right.
Doctor, can I have you tell us what the difference between a laceration and an abrasion is?
Yes, a laceration is the tearing of the skin. And so it's basically, if you think, a lot of times people use the term cut, but that's not really what cut is really with a sharp object. So you're cutting or incising through the tissue. Blunt trauma is, you fall and hit your head and, you got to go get stitches on it. An abrasion is basically just a scrape. That's,
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any recross?
You agree hard surfaces covered by gravel can cause abrasions?
yes, that's possible.
Anything further?
No, Judge.
All right. Thank you. You may step down if you want to hand me the exhibits.
There's an extra. There's something on top.
Thank you. Do you, question is there a witness we can do in a half hour or start, at least to?
Well, that's the question to Your Honor. The state's next witness is going to be Nick Stalkey from the crime lab. And I expect the state's direct will take us past noon. So we can start and then.
You have a good natural break at some point, you think?
I think there's a decent natural break.
Why don't we start, and then we'll take a break and have lunch, and then have them finish up the direct when you get back.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you. We're waiting for the witness, I've been handed a stack of exhibits, and again, I have no objection to the admission or publication of those exhibits. There may be some limitations to exhibit number 34, but I suspect we can take that up at a different time.
Okay. Is this Exhibit 33, 34, 35, 36.
Exhibit 34 is a crime lab report that is multiple pages, and so they're,
Okay, well, all right, well, let's get Mr. Stalky.
Thought our witness was right outside the courtroom. He was apparently waiting downstairs,
Okay,
elevatoring.
all right, no problem.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, I am Nick Stalke, Stahlke.
Sir, what do you do for a living?
I'm a crime scene response specialist for the state of Wisconsin at the State Crime Laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin.
And is that a job that you are currently holding and doing every day, or something else?
I am not. I retired in October of 2023.
Before you retired, sir, how long had you been doing that job?
Well, I came to Wisconsin in 1992, so I had approximately 31 years with the state of Wisconsin, but prior to that I worked a similar position in the state of Idaho, and I worked there for 5 years. So all in all, I have about 36 years of experience in crime scene response.
36 years in crime scene response. When you retired, can you explain to us specifically what your job duties were in crime scene response the last couple of years of your work at the crime lab?
Well, it didn't really change all that much. When I started, I was trained in processing of crime scenes in the state of Idaho. There I got all of my initial training in processing the scenes and bloodstain pattern analysis and things on that order. So when I came to Wisconsin, I jumped right in and continued to process scenes because I already had 5 years of experience, and quickly became a team leader who then is responsible for the team that is processing the crime scenes. So for the approximately 31 years in the state of Wisconsin, I was a team leader responsible for the processing of crime scenes around the state.
Do you have any specialized education or training that lets you do that job specifically of being a team leader for a crime response team at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab?
Well, certainly I have attended numerous courses, 40-hour courses, multiple day courses that provided training in this processing of crime scenes, the analysis of bloodstain patterns, bullet trajectories, collection of evidence, and then a number of multiple scenes, webinars that I attended that also then provide background information on those types of things.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Go ahead.
Mr. Stalkey, I handed you what's been pre-marked as exhibit number 33. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
Exhibit number 33 is a copy of my statement of qualifications.
And is that a document that summarizes your training and experience and work history that lets you do that job you've been telling us about?
It does.
I'd move for the admission of exhibit 33.
Any objection? Received? Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stalkey, I'd like to direct your attention to the morning of July 23rd, 2021. Were you working that day as a team leader with the crime response team?
Yes, I was.
Were you called, or did you become involved in a case involving the deaths of 3 men at a quarry in Crosse County?
I was.
Did you get a phone call? How did you become involved?
Yes, at approximately 6:30, if I recall, that morning, Captain John Siegel requested the crime lab's assistance in the processing of this crime scene. So we rallied our team and came over to La Crosse and County and got here about 10:45 that morning.
Got the call around 6:30. You got there about 10:45 in the morning. You're based in, did I hear you correctly, Madison?
That's correct.
Okay, so bit of a drive, right?
It is.
You said you assembled the team, I believe?
Yes.
Who all was on the team that day?
We always have two people that attend scenes, the team leader, of course, and then a photographer to document the crime scenes. That particular day, we had an additional person. We like to have 3 if possible, have extra set of hands. But that day we had Cassidy Bowles and Michelle Obst, which Michelle was the photographer and Cassidy Bowles was training in photography, so Michelle was overseeing and helping train her in photography.
And just for the record, for the court reporter, Obst is O-B-S-T and Bowles is B-O-L-L-E-S. Your position was team leader. Can you walk us through, what did you do when you arrived at this quarry? And let me first ask you, was that the Romskog quarry?
It was that
Okay.
quarry, yes.
What did you do when you got there?
Excuse me, what did I?
Turn my head down. I shouldn't talk into the table. What did you do when you got there?
Well, we came in on County Road S, which I don't know if we were directed to come in from that direction, but that seemed to be a really windy road, and so it took us a while just to get on that road to the scene. But once we arrived, I always seek out people that know something about the scene, how they came upon it, and whatever information they can provide me that might assist me. In some cases, we will get a short description of the scene during the request, and then I always try to build on that or to see whether or not there's any changes have occurred since we last had communication. So I seek out the person that knows the most about the scene at that time and get a little briefing from them. And it was Detective Leinfelder and, John Williams, is that name? I think, anyway, two detectives provided us me some information about that. And then I do a walkthrough. Sometimes I'll take people from the agencies or just the crime lab people that come with me through the scene just to get a feel for what type of scene we have, what evidence potentially could be at that scene, and then determine what tasks need to be conducted and in what order, and if there's any additional special equipment that's necessary, or if there needs to be any more people requested to come to the scene, some experts in certain fields. So when I approached the scene, I realized that we had certain evidence that was at the scene, and it was a very hot, windy day. So I knew then that because there was some impressions in the soft sand or dirt, which was rather dusty, that these could deteriorate under the weather conditions we had that particular day. So I prioritized certain things due to the weather.
Okay. And I'm going to follow up on that, but before I get there, you mentioned speaking with detectives on the scene. You mentioned Detective Leinfelder and Detective Williams.
Yes.
Okay. They provided you a briefing, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. When they provided you that information, you previously testified that you arrived at 10:45 a.m. Did that briefing happen right away, or was that later on, multiple hours later?
It may have been later. I know that when I first arrived, I was a bit anxious about the weather conditions, and that I needed to get to it immediately. So it may have occurred later. I don't recall exactly.
You don't recall that?
No.
Sir, did you ultimately, as the team leader on this case, prepare a report documenting your observations, your opinions, information about the scene?
I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Go ahead. You don't need to ask permission each time. You can just go up. Okay?
Fantastic. Thank you, Judge.
Yeah.
Mr. Stuckey, I handed you what's been previously marked as exhibit number 34. Is that your report?
Yes, exhibit number 34 is a copy of my report, which also includes technical review checklist and 19 pages of my notes.
Okay. By prior agreement, it sounds like exhibit 34, Your Honor, I'd move it into evidence.
That's correct. It'd be received, or
Yes, we're not publishing the whole thing. Do what we talk about.
okay. It'll be received.
Thank you. And just because I want to be clear on these kind of things, does the Wisconsin State Crime Lab attach to a case its own numerical designation, its own case number?
Yes, it does.
What's the case number for this one?
The case number for this particular case was M21-1670.
Okay. Now, looking at your report, Does that help you recall being briefed when you got there or sometime later on?
I don't have any specific times and when I was briefed by them. No.
Mr. Stalky, I'm going to direct you to page 1, the middle of the page, sentence starting with upon arrival.
Oh.
Does that help you, sir?
Yeah, I'm finding that. Oh, sure enough. Upon arrival at approximately 10:45 a.m., the team was met and briefed by Detectives John Williams and Fritz Leinfeldner of the Crosse County Sheriff's Office. Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you recall during that briefing, were you given any names of potential suspects?
No.
Were you given any names of any potential witnesses?
No.
Were you given any names of any potential eyewitnesses?
No.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to pick up where you left off a little bit ago. You were talking about it being a hot and windy day.
It was.
And you're also talking about sort of the quality of the sand or the dirt. Is that the right word?
Sure.
Okay. Why were those two things, well, one thing, dirt or sand, why was that important to you considering the weather?
Footwear and tire track impression evidence is one of the most overlooked evidence at crime scenes generally. So I make it a point to look for it first thing, because you can lose that evidence not only from contamination or just from activities that occur during the processing of the scene. You could destroy that type of evidence, so you lose it if you're not looking for it immediately. So again, it was one of the things then that I tend to do is I look for that types of evidence, and this scene had not only footwear impressions, but it had tire track impressions, and this type of evidence is fleeting in that it's very vulnerable to the weather conditions, and that particular day with that type of surface, it's a dusty, dirty scene, at least that driveway, that with the heat and the wind, those impressions are going to not only lose, maybe be obliterated entirely, but it will certainly lose some detail if we did not process them early and quickly that particular day.
Thank you. Now, sir, I want to be clear about something. You're not any kind of expert. You're not a footwear or tire impression comparison expert. Is that right?
That's correct. I don't do any comparisons in that type of work, right?
So it wouldn't be your job to say, take a shoe and a footwear impression and say, these two caused, this caused that.
I do not do that, no.
No. So why then are we talking about footwear and tire impressions? What is it about your job that lets you talk about that?
Well, when you, as a processor of crime scenes, you look for anything that might be helpful in determining maybe the possible suspects or how this particular crime went down. And so you look for any potential evidence, or you look for anything that possibly could help you in regard to that type of processing. And so in this particular case, you have footwear, you have tire track impressions, you're going to document them so that they could then be used potentially for this particular case.
You look for things that might be relevant later on.
Oh, absolutely.
In addition to tire impressions and footwear impressions that you noticed when you arrived at the quarry, what was some of the other evidence, if any, that immediately struck you when you were there?
Other than the tire track and footwear impressions?
That's correct.
Well, it's a striking scene to begin with, because you have from the County Road M, the entrance to the quarry. This is dirt drive, and it's somewhat elevated from the gate to this quarry, and you have 3 bodies laying near the gate. That's a pretty striking visual thing right off the bat. And in and around those bodies were additional evidence, such as personal items and fired cartridge cases. And of course, then anytime there's wounds caused by bullets or firearms, you're going to have blood. So we had all those things at this scene.
Okay. Did I hear you correctly? Because you have a very soothing, lowish voice, and so I want to be sure I hear you well. You mentioned personal items.
Yes,
Did I also hear cartridge casings?
correct.
Okay. I call them spent shells. Is that the same? Are we talking about the same thing?
I like to use the term fired cartridge cases
Okay.
because you have cartridges would be a bullet in what most people refer to a bullet. Once it's been fired, there's no more bullets, so you have a fired cartridge case remaining.
Thank you. That's much more descriptive. I like that better. And then there were the 3 bodies. Sir, can you tell us during your time at the crime lab, how many homicide scenes have you responded to?
Somewhere in between 300 and 400 scenes. It may be more than that. I just never kept track.
And out of those, as many as 300 or 400, how many where there were 3 bodies?
There's been a couple that had 3. There's been some that have had more, and of course, numerous singles and doubles.
Fair to say it's not the norm?
No, 3 is a significant scene.
With those 3 individuals at the quarry who were deceased, and the personal items, were you actually able to identify the persons using their personal items next to them?
I think through the assistance from law enforcement, we were able to identify who the bodies were, or the individuals' names for the bodies that were present there at the scene.
And so with that, were you able, and you can use your report, exhibit number 34 if this helps, refer to the individual bodies by their actual names?
Yes, I could.
Okay. You mentioned that on the crime response team, you were joined with Ms. Obst and Ms. Bowles, and Ms. Obst was the photographer?
She was in that primary role, but because we were training Cassidy Bowles, she was overseeing that training. But so she was both of them were pretty much actively documenting through photography the scene.
Okay. Taking photographs of a scene such as this, is that a primary job of the crime response team?
It is, yes.
And just ballpark, do you recall, were a lot of photos taken at this time?
Oh, there's always a lot of photos taken, but I can't recall the exact number.
Your Honor, I'd say this is a pretty good time for us to have a natural break.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a lunch break. Again, please don't talk about the case. If you can leave your headset right there, and we will start back up about 1:15. If you need something, let the Jim or Terry know. We'll go from there. Okay, we'll see you after lunch.